Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. All right, ladies and gents, welcome back to another episode. This is your host, Eric, and today I'm joined by Meagan McCarthy. Meagan, thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been really looking forward to this for a long time, so I'm glad we were able to connect.
Yeah, it's funny because there's several episodes where me and the guest are like, yeah, it's been a struggle trying to connect, and I think it's just a testament to how busy we all are. First responders, I think there is something innate in us that drives us towards the career, which is usually just doing. And, you're not actively in uniform now, but you're always like doing. And I'm watching you and the fight that you're taking on, or the fights in a good way. And yeah, it's really cool to see what you're doing.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I'm trying to, have some service after the service wherever I fit in and, still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. So we'll see where this path leads.
I love that. I love that little adage because, you're grown. But yeah, I like taking that on as far as like who you want to be when you grow up, like what the future you is. And, I was recently reminded of Matthew McConaughey's Oscar acceptance speech where he talks about his hero being his future self.
Mhm.
And I think that some people might have taken that or might take that a little narcissistic, but I think it's super inspirational just to recognize that, hey, we're never really past our prime, and the today and the present should always be our golden years, and we should always be striving for more.
Absolutely. I agree. I think it's a testament to intestinal fortitude and you always want to reach a little higher and push a little harder and I think, like you said, first responders, it's definitely a calling, it's not really a career. So, I think that's something that we all should embrace whether you're a family member or a spouse. There's always a little bit more you can push and a little bit more you can do.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, that's what the show's all about. And for a lot of cops, they may see you on social media. They might see you on the actual traditional media, bringing that message forward, trying to support. But before we get into that, we're going to rewind a little bit and kind of go back in time. But yeah, as law enforcement, what would little kid Megan say about how your life has gone and what you're doing and, even getting into police work? Was that something you were interested in at a young age?
I think little Megan would probably laugh her head off if she saw where she is now. I came
Mhm.
from a family of no law enforcement. Both of my grandpas served in the military, but my dad was a businessman and my mom stayed home to raise me and my twin sister. So I didn't come from a family of service really. And I was actually in nursing school and
Mm.
I went on a ride along. And just like so many of us, the ride along hooked me. Within a couple hours, we were in a, pursuit and it was a felony T stop. And
Mm.
then I also saw the side of policing where it was the community wanted you there, they appreciated you. I saw a little bit of the medical trauma type stuff, and it just really felt like a perfect fit for me. So it kind of, I don't want to say fell into my lap because that's the wrong verbiage, but I just felt like that day really changed my perspective on what I wanted to do. And I applied for the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department. It was my one and only department. I threw all my
Wow.
eggs in that basket. And
Yeah.
a couple months later, I started the academy and I loved my job. I genuinely loved being a cop.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And what a cool exposure. Was it part of your program to interact with first responders? Did you know somebody or what got you into that ride along?
No, it was just one of my friends. She worked in a local, department. Well, it was the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department, but it was one of our local stations. And she's
Hmm.
like, "Hey, you should come out. It's kind of fun." And I had no idea what to expect. Like I said, I've had good interactions with cops. I had one speeding ticket when I was like 18, and that was
Hmm.
basically it. But I didn't know what to expect. I really went in there with, arms wide open and an open mind, and I fell in love with the job. I saw the camaraderie and just the way that it felt like an extended family, and that really just sucked me in, and I was hooked.
Yeah, that's so cool. And I love that it makes a lot of sense, if you're in the first responder community, and I would include a lot of caregivers and nurses along with that, right? Because a lot of folks they want to take care of people, and they love the grind, and especially, certain units and ERs, like, yeah, they totally get that shift work and that grind and that response to trauma and this response to making a difference in the moment. So yeah, like, you can totally see how that makes sense on the back end. Now, do you remember anything that made your first run, your first and only run into police work, a super successful journey? Because there are so many young hopefuls that listen in and listen for tips and things like that.
I'll be really transparent. I'm not sure. I didn't have a college degree. I didn't have much life experience. At the time, I was a stay at home mom of a little 3-year-old girl. And I think it really boils down to your mindset and your heart. I think background investigators are able to weed through the people that are in it for the right reasons. And like I said, I didn't come from a background of somebody that I woke up when I was 5 years old and I was like, I'm going to be a cop. I really woke up and I was changed, and my heart was impassioned and emboldened to be in this line of work. So, I wish I could say like I had a bachelor's degree and all these things. I went on and I got my degree in criminal justice after the fact, but I think it's just about having the right frame of mind and being able to be a human being. Because at the end of the day, of course, you want to have some of the attributes that cops need. You want to have the courage and you want to have the reliability. But I think, especially nowadays, people want to be able to see you as a human. So,
Hmm.
not being a robot and giving, the stereotypical, I want to make the community safer. Like, genuinely, why do you want to become a cop? Because
Yeah.
we all want a safe community. We all live in the community. But what does that really mean? And I think that's where I was able to tap into is, channel some of my momness or, being vulnerable. And ultimately it got me a job. And like I said, I loved it.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that too. And, thinking back, just my last assignment was in hiring and as the recruiting hiring sergeant. And I say all the time, yeah, be yourself, because we want to work with a person, right? We want to work with our buddies. We want to work with someone that's just going to open up and show your human side. But of course, like, be your best self, like practice
Right.
and get yourself a little polished. And, that's what things like this are helpful for. Um, so awesome. And then going into your career, let's talk about that, like how your career started off and, where it went, highs, lows.
Yeah. So for my department, when you graduate the academy, everybody goes to corrections. So I worked in the jail for about 3 months. And then I was fortunate enough to be reassigned to our centralized classification unit, which is like the in house gang team. You look at
Mm,
people's background and you place them in the population accordingly. So I did that for about 4 or 5 months. And then I ended up going out to patrol at Victorville City. And Victorville City is ranked the number 9 most dangerous city in all of California. We have our, high crime, we have a really high homeless and drug population, and it's really a fun place to work if you want to be proactive. And I went through field training. Obviously, I had my struggles just, acclimating to some of the things that I maybe wasn't prepared for in terms of the way that the community would respond to you in a negative way. I definitely wasn't ignorant back in 2016, but the world was different. And I was on patrol for about a year and a half, and then I was reassigned to the school resource officer spot. So I was in charge of 6 elementary schools in our area, and people always want to dog on the SROs, but that is the hidden gem. I
mm,
loved it. I worked Monday through Friday, and I loved these kids. I adored them. I would go eat lunch with them. We would do, Read Across America Day. It was just beautiful to interact with the community in a different way. And once the school year ended, I went back to patrol. And then ultimately, 3 months later, September 4th of 2019 was my shooting. So that was the last day that I actively worked. And, I was a baby deputy. I only had 3 years on, but I was thankful for the time that I was able to serve.
yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I think it's worth taking a little highlight to, or a little pause to highlight the SRO, because I was recently asked about that on James Gearing's Behind the Shield. And I said, like, your ideal SRO is like super freaking squared away. Like, a bad day might happen in one of those schools or you're close to one of those schools. Like, we want the most serious, taking the job seriously to like the fundamentals of what our role is at the base of it, which is to protect innocent people and kids. Like, what greater investment should we have? At the same time, it should be your like officer engaged, like your proactive officers with that tenacity. Like, it should be a tiring job to interact with all these kids and be engaging and be approachable, and staff and teachers. Like, there's a lot to mitigate and be diplomatic. I think it's such an opportunity that absolutely should not be like your retired on duty kind of cop.
Right. And I think that's the way it's portrayed in a lot of agencies is you kind of put your non-go-getters there, but we would have so many, unfortunately, sex abuse cases come through the schools. We would have to investigate them. I was in charge of doing the security threat assessment, so the active shooter plans for the schools, in case there was a hazmat incident or, a disgruntled employee. I was in charge of all that. So there was a lot of behind the scenes stuff, and I would help with traffic control and just also being a human because, these kids are in the very, very early stages of developing their own perception. So if you
Hmm.
can put law enforcement in there and be able to show them like, hey, I'm just like you, I'm no different, then we're already setting up our future generations for success. So I loved being an SRO. When my lieutenant called me in and said, hey, Meagan, you're going back to patrol, I was really sad. I love the running and gunning. I love finding the guns and the dope and responding to, all the stuff. But my heart lied in those schools.
Yeah, such a big deal. And for listeners that, are newer to the podcast, like, look back, shout out to Thad Kirchhoff, former SRO, because he really shows his heart. And I think the heart of most SROs that do that role and like what they care about, what their prerogatives are. Yeah, so you're shooting, and we talked before the recording, and you've told the story on multiple podcasts, and so I don't mean to go into the nitty-gritty. I recognize for a lot of people, retelling a traumatic event can be triggering, right? Like, there's no need to re-experience that for you, and it's really easy for other people to listen into the details. So totally, like, please share like your level of what you want to talk about, because I would like to ask you about follow-up and processing that rather than the initial incident. And if you want to give a shout out to, like, an example of where you talked about it in detail for the listeners too.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do find a lot of, comfort in community, and being vulnerable and sharing things has been very therapeutic for me. Talk therapy is very helpful. So I'm actually healed enough where I can speak about it without it triggering me. So I
Very cool.
appreciate you being so kind and gracious because that is a lot of things, our generation is so fixated on true crime. We want the blood and the gore and like the,
Mm-hmm.
craziness. So people forget that there's a human telling that story. So thank you. But if
Absolutely.
people want to hear in, they can just head over to my Instagram. I have a couple of things on there. I don't mean to like shamelessly plug that, but
No, please plug away. We're gonna plug it later too,
yeah.
but yeah,
So
please
if
do.
if you're interested, I have like an hour and a half long, fully in-depth podcast. If you're interested, if not, I'll just give a brief rundown. So September 4th, 2019, I was working obviously on patrol, and around 8:30 in the morning, it was the very first call of the day. I responded to an unknown problem. So it's kind of the plethora of something's going on, but we don't know. There was a woman on the end of dispatch. She called 911 to say she wanted her adult son removed from the house. All we heard was, oh my God, get my son out of here. Then the line kind of goes dead. So she's still on the phone with dispatch, and you can hear like an altercation in the background, but you can't make out what's happening. So I respond, I'm in the area, and our department is very understaffed, as most are these days. So you don't have the luxury of having 3 or 4 people or even one other person to back you. 98% of the time you're responding to calls by yourself. That's
Oh
what we were
man.
yeah, that's what we were used to. If you can back your partner, of course you do, but it's just not always that luxury. We ride one-man units. We don't have a partner with us, and it's just unfortunately the culture of our department right now. Hopefully they can get to the point where they get more staffing, but that's a whole nother topic.
Mm-hmm.
So I respond and I walk up the driveway to make contact with the reporting party, the mom. The front door flies open and it's the suspect. He's matching the description. He walks directly towards me and I can tell he's having a bad day. And he immediately starts telling me, just let me go, let me leave, let me leave. But the mom's right behind him holding a knife and she's still on the phone with dispatch. So, based on our training and experience, we can
Mm,
say that something had occurred where this mom was in such fear that she needed to arm herself against her own son. So I was not going to let him leave. At that time, I need to make sure what I'm investigating, if there's a dead body inside, if a crime had
mm-hmm.
occurred, what happened. So I go to just place his hand to the small of his back and it completely triggers him. Within 17 seconds, he tells me, if we fight, I will kill you and I'm going to headbutt the expletive out of you. So I know this isn't really going to be, a very easy de-escalatory consensual encounter type.
Mm-hmm.
He's not having
Yeah.
a good day. So as soon as I go to place his left hand at the small of his back, he turns around, he grabs my wrist. We're like tug of warring over my arm. And I'm telling him, let go of me, let go of me. I won't bore you with the details. I go through, the defensive tactics, try to use my baton. Nothing was effective. We fought for about 2 minutes before this video kicks on that everybody's seen. At this point, we're in the roadway and he is punching me over and over in the face. He punched me to the point of, I was losing consciousness. I knew I was losing this fight. I take my gun out and I tell him, one last effort trying to stop, the violence is I'm going to shoot you. I didn't want to have to shoot a son in front of his mom. And I was thinking logically, if somebody were to tell me I'm going to shoot you, I would probably stop what I was doing. And that enraged him even further. So we fall into the gravel. He mounts on top of me. I take aim at his head and I miss. And then he now is focused on my gun. He traps my hand above my head and he has one hand around the slide and one hand kind of at the grip by the trigger guard. A round gets discharged into the ground and he is able to rip the gun from me. So as it discharged on the ground, it actually malfunctioned and caused a stovepipe, which ultimately saved my life. So I turn onto my hands and my knees and I look up and he's pointing the gun at my forehead and I hear the trigger click and I thought I had died, but I still was able to move and run. So I turn and I run for cover and I hear another gunshot go off and I know he's shooting at my back. So I had tried to run for a fence, but it's like that sheer wooden fence where there's no way you can, scale anything.
Mm-hmm.
And miraculously, the dispatcher listening knew that I wasn't responding. During the fight, he grabbed the bun at the back of my head, which disconnected my radio because it ran down my vest. And so I was trying to relay information and nothing was going through. So she sent my partners to me. They came code 3, lights and sirens, and they ultimately saved my life. Takes his attention. He starts shooting at my partners. They get into a shooting with him. He's taken to the hospital. I'm taken to the hospital. And then I start my nearly 4.5-year journey through trying to figure out my brain and the aftermath.
Yeah. Well, thank you for unpacking that. That's a lot. And for people listening that don't know, that aren't in the job, holy cow, like 2 minutes in a fight or even in a struggling, resisting arrest is an eternity. Like, I don't know how many times officers, my peers and I have reviewed like CAD, right? Like the little notes of like times when we were fighting with one kind of thing. And it feels like 10 minutes and sometimes it's like 35 seconds. And that's like
Right.
multiple officers. So for you to be in a literal fight for life that most academies have trained for decades, right? Like this might be the day, but kudos to you for surviving. You did what is our number one priority, right? So I think that it's so worth recognizing that. And I appreciate how you shared that, like, you thought you were gone. And that's something that's a mantra that is trained of like, you're never done. But that's like an honest response. And I had the same thing, like in my shooting where the fire like swept over a few of us. And I was just like, well, that's it. Like game over. Like it was a good run. And then I kind of had what you shared was kind of snap me out of it. Like, oh, I'm still here. Level's still going. Like time to do some more stuff. So no, thank you so much and for sharing that because that's a big deal. And people have so much to learn from that. And whether or not they're in a situation anywhere near that, I think it's so, so helpful for a healthy mindset and a prepared mindset to think about these things.
Yeah, thank you. It's, so many people ask me, like, what was I thinking in that moment? And it's true when they say that your life flashes before your eyes. I wasn't worried, and I'm going to be completely authentic. Of course, I resorted to my training. Of course, I resorted to what I was taught and told. But when I had a gun pointed at my head and I thought I was dying, I thought about who was going to pick up my daughter from school. Like that was my thought. And I think it's worth noting that it's okay to recognize that you're allowed to be a human being while still being tactically proficient. And it was weird. I had so much pain from him punching me and he ended up breaking my eye socket. When I saw the gun and I had the pain, it was like, oh, I just died because my brain went there. But then I was like, oh, I'm still moving. It's like my body went into fight or flight on its own and it just ran. And of course, that relates back to the training. but I'm definitely not a superhero. I'm not somebody that is, without feeling. And I think that's worth noting during the job and in the aftermath of a critical incident, that it's okay to still resort back to being a human.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that self-preservation is so huge and it overrides for that purpose. Like, you can train your brain, you can do like, force on force and all these things that, my department's pretty good about. But in the moment, there's a part of me, and I've shared this, I believe, one-on-one. I don't think I've gone on recording with this, but when I was in my shooting and I told my peer support and a couple others since then that have shared in their own kind of traumatic situations or critical incidents, and they kick themselves, right? Because they're like, well, I didn't react the way I thought I would, or the way, they're kind of embarrassed and ashamed. I'm like, no, you got to knock that out of your head. And I provide this example, which is in that shooting, where a handful of us were shooting at the suspect that tried to ambush us or during a canine track, my dog. I, in my brain, it's so disjointed, right? Like it's so fragmented, the memory, and I don't know the actual order. And I actually write my statement that way to say, hey, I don't know whether this is chronologically accurate or not, because I thought there would be a surveillance camera that would verify everything. But I was super intrigued and curious to watch that surveillance, but I was also terrified because a part of me wondered if I would be, if I throw my hands in the air and I do the whole like Team America, like waving my hands in the air before I kind of gathered my wits. And I was like, oh man, I'm still in a gunfight. But I had that recollection that I was trying to get out of the fire and I walked in a big circle and then I came back like, no, I'm still alive. I still needed to address the suspect. Oh my gosh, my buddy's on the ground. Like, we need to make sure he's okay. All these competing inputs and stimuli. But there was a part where I was like, I don't even know how I reacted. And it turned out that the surveillance wasn't even functional. So I was equal parts relieved and disappointed that I wouldn't really know what it looked like. But at the same time, I just share all that to say there are so many first responders that they train seriously. They take their job really seriously. But there are these things that it's called your body's desire to survive this crazy, crazy thing. Don't blame yourself, right? Offer yourself some grace, because if you flipped it on your buddy or your partner, you would never allow them to talk about themselves that way. And so just I throw that out there.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the brain's going to do brain things. At the end of the day, our central nervous system is no different than a reptile. That's why they call it, the reptilian brain.
Mm-hmm.
Their only, function is to survive and mate and eat. So when you're in a fight for your life, your brain doesn't care about anything else. It doesn't care about defensive tactics. It doesn't care about the perception of your partners. It cares about getting you to live. So, that was one thing that took me years and years and years to come to grips was I had the guilt and the shame. Man, I'm so embarrassed in the way that I reacted, and everybody saw this video, and my entire career is minimized to these couple seconds that millions of people are watching and critiquing. But you just have to let it go, because at the end of the day, I came home, I'm here. I still have, a couple of nuts and bolts loose in my brain, but at least I'm alive. And I think that's one of the main points that people forget is if you survive, that should be enough. It doesn't mean that what it took to get there is insufficient.
Yeah, that's so impactful, right? And to keep it light, yeah, I don't think you can do more than a few years of this without having some loose nuts and
Yeah.
bolts. I think there's probably some loose nuts and bolts for people that really sign up for this fully
Yeah.
knowing what they're getting into and to stay in it. So shout out and like, virtual fist bumps to all of our fellow, boys and girls in blue and red and every other thing. You've shone some light on some of that adversity and rehabilitation and kind of reorientation following that huge incident. What else was that next chapter like for you?
Well, it was, at a really pivotal point for our entire nation. My really coming to grips of everything that happened was right around the summer of 2020 when our country shut down. My daughter was now home from school and I had to be her teacher, and I'm still trying to figure out, what is wrong with me. I would hear a toilet lid close and I would be triggered. I would be like
Mm.
hiding in the corner of my room and I didn't understand it. I fought it so hard that I actually ended up damaging myself more because I didn't get the help initially. I am very thankful. He was my boyfriend at the time. We're now married. We have two beautiful kids in addition to my daughter. And he was my biggest support. He was my biggest help. And it just took a lot of self-reflection. And I know that sounds very cliche, but it wasn't until August of 2021, so almost 2 years later, when I tried to kill myself, that I really realized I needed more help than I was letting on. I went through the motions of, therapy once or twice a week. I'm fine. I'm good. It's good. No doctor would sign me off. And I was still torn. Like, do I go back to work? Am I done? There was a part of my being that died that day, but I still was ashamed that I wasn't able to go back like my male partners. People had been in shootings. I wasn't the first person to ever be assaulted and shot at, but why am I so affected? And it was that August morning. I remember I texted my husband and I said, "You got to come home from work." I don't know why. There was nothing crazy about that day, but I put my son down for a nap. He was almost 1, and I took a whole bottle of pills and I grabbed my gun. And my husband came home and he was like, "Meagan, what are you doing?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I'm just so tired of fighting. I don't want to feel like this anymore. Like, I give up. I'm done. He wins. I'm done." And he called in my family and we had a little, family powwow. And that was the day that I said, okay, like, my husband deserves a better wife. My children deserve a better mom. So we're going to fight. And I found a culturally competent PTSD trauma therapist. And we worked 4 or 5 days a week in intensive therapy. I did EMDR, color therapy. I really got into breath work and grounding and meditation and all of the things. I committed myself 100% to actually grieving my old self enough to rebuild. And it took, unfortunately, me almost committing suicide to get there. And I don't think that has to be the case. But in my situation, I felt like there was a huge stigma. I didn't really have the support of my department. And I didn't feel like I was worthy of sticking up for myself. So once I finally got over that and I was true and authentic, that's when I finally healed.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I mean, it almost feels dumb to say it, but it's so courageous for you not just to have that battle and win that battle and face the demons, but to share about it. And hopefully I think that's the joint, prerogative of so many people like us that comment and share about these kinds of things, is recognizing like this is going to be a continued thing for so many first responders and military vets and that we just need to share story because someone's story might resonate in such a way and catch someone at just the right time or be shared to someone at just the right time that can pull them out of that irreversible thing, right? That place of so much hurt. So I really do appreciate you sharing that in all the ways that you continue to share it. Now, I want to focus in on what you said about a culturally competent mental health professional, because I have been on the record saying, hey, if you can't get one and they're booked out, like, you can talk to somebody, right? And I talked about psychologytoday.com, I believe, and how I sought, a general just dude therapist because I needed to talk about general stuff,
Hmm.
work-life balance. But I do think it's so impactful when you're dealing with first responder trauma to have someone that knows what the heck they're talking about. And so I appreciate you highlighting that too.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely no shame or shade on somebody who is a, marriage and family therapist. Obviously, we need them and we appreciate them, but I view it kind of like if you have a broken leg, you're not going to go to a stomach doctor. Like, you want the
Yeah.
doctor that's trained to help you. And
Hmm.
that's perfectly fine. It took me, like I said, 2.5 years to find my person, and she was amazing. I firmly believe that she is the reason why I am able to be so outspoken today. And she got it. She had been a police officer and she became a therapist, like so many of us that would just want to help. She saw the need, so she transitioned, and I am thankful for her. And I know there's so many amazing programs that are able to connect people with culturally competent therapists these days. Back when I was really in the thick of it, I shut down all my social media. I stopped talking to my friends. I really went into hiding because I was so ashamed. And in all reality, that was the worst thing I ever did
Mm.
because I isolated myself and that was dangerous. So when I came back to social media and I said, okay, well, I want to try and find a community because I believe community is comfort. If you can find one other person that makes you feel not an alien, then at least you realize that there is somebody else. And I went looking and looking and I found a couple, and I said, okay, well, maybe now is my time to try and speak up because like, what do I have to lose? And I found you, I found the Overwatch Collective, the Wounded Blue. I mean, I could go on for hours. The amount of people that I have found just by being vulnerable has made the biggest impact on my life.
Yeah, well, thank you for including me with that fantastic array. But I'm truly humbled to be part of this community. Not just law enforcement, but the people that are going to have the uncomfortable conversations. And yeah, we were uncomfortable with it, right? Like I talked about how I've been involved in peer support for so many years, but it wasn't until I lost my buddy in the line of duty that I even entertained, after so much nudging from some of my best friends, to go talk to someone, right? Like how resistant was I, even though I was like this mental health mental health help advocate, right? And before we move on, I do want to focus back again because you mentioned lack of support from your administration, and I think that's so critical. And I truly believe that so many people that listen are up and coming police leaders that want to know what that looks like, or what would have helped. What would have helped for you to experience and to feel and to hear?
And I definitely want to make it clear that I don't necessarily think it was the administration in my department. I think it was a lack of understanding that somebody on the outs may need help like somebody that's in.
Mm,
Once my reports came in that I was not fit for duty and I was making the transition to retirement, you kind of get lost in the weeds, and not to say that the active duty police officers and firefighters and dispatchers don't need the help. Of course they do. But the aftermath of a critical incident shouldn't be more traumatizing than the incident itself. And that's what it was for me. I would reach out, questions about X, Y, and Z. And it was, well, I don't have that answer. Ask this person. Or I don't have this. Go to there. And then so you finally feel like, well, nobody wants to help me. So they must not care about me anymore. And unfortunately, one of the things that I speak about is, lessons learned. Like, how can we help support our people better? I ended up going to trial alone. I didn't have anybody from my department there. I didn't have anybody from my union there, no peer support members there. So I'm very candid about, the fact that if you have a active duty or retired member or somebody just on ROD or injury, you need to still support them
mhm.
because we see an epidemic of police officers killing themselves. But what about the retired members? I bet you we have no idea how many retired folks actually commit suicide and they feel like they're forgotten. So I think it's just a gap that, not to say it's in the entire law enforcement community. I know that there are departments that really pride themselves on, staying connected with the people on the other side, but that was just where I found myself. I retired March of 2022 and then my trial didn't start until May of 2023. So I think I was just, kind of forgotten, but maybe not on purpose. I don't want to pull the plug and say that I blame this person and that person. I think it's just, part of the revolving door.
Yeah, I think it's extremely aware to make that distinction that you're not sure, but you can recognize all these potential nuances because so many of our peers, right, wrong, or indifferent, like it only feels a certain way and they're not able to see a certain perspective. And I really appreciate that middle ground. That's what I'm really striving for. I'm technically in administration now, so I recognize that a lot of walls go up with my people. I was like the cool sergeant that was like wellness dude, a couple months ago, and now I'm something else to some people. And I like to think that I'm still coming off genuinely by some people, that I'm trying to just do what's best and communicate what's best. But I do recognize that there is that dynamic. But I appreciate looking at it from multiple angles and just considering that, because I think that's helpful for people to, again, potentially give grace and give empathy. And if we're trying to move the needle, it's not to fight these battles and these wars. It's trying to say, hey, I experienced this. This is a level of awareness, and I have some suggestions, and maybe we can get there together. Certainly, we need everyone to get there together.
Absolutely. Like I said, I loved my department. I have no ill will towards any specific person. I think it's just one of those things when, unfortunately, so many departments are run like a business. You have to make sure that people are doing the right thing, they're showing up, you have the right thing for your people. So if you're not, out of sight, out of mind, then you kind of get forgotten. And I think that's just one of the reasons why I speak about making sure that the aftermath is not worse than the incident. Because, of course, having a gun to my head was awful. but feeling like I did for the last 4, almost 5 years now was inherently worse. And I'm only speaking for myself. I'm sure other people have had great experiences, but my time is done, but there's 18,000 police departments across our country. So there has to be one other person that maybe needs that support from that, commanding officer or that sergeant or even the corporal, just to check in on them and make sure that they're doing okay.
Yeah, no, there certainly are. And I think that's why your messages are so powerful because you're speaking for yourself, but you know that there's a possibility that there's some crossover. And then you later find that there's some verification there when people reach out and they share your message. It does resonate. And so, where did that grow and go as far as carrying on these messages and growing that message and doing what you're working on and what you've been working on the last couple of years?
I honestly can't really give you a specific place or time or thing. It's almost like the grassroots movement. I just felt like there was a need. I saw a shortfall, and I realized that at some point in my life, I am going to have to lay down and take my last breath. And I want to know that I fought as hard and as long as I possibly could. And whether my little boys grow up and they want to be cops or firefighters, I want to have a better experience for them than I did. And my husband works for the department. My sister works for the department. She works at the same station that I used to.
Mm.
So, our people deserve better. Police officers deserve to treat each other better and treat, themselves better. When we're in the academy, we're taught that if something happens, you call out code 999. That's what it was for us. Officer down, officer needs help. Everybody rushes to them and they don't even hesitate. They don't ask why. They don't tiptoe. They respond. But as soon as you take that duty belt and that uniform off and you say you need help, people are a little bit more hesitant to come to you. And I think that's because there's an idea that we don't know what to say. So we think if we say nothing, then it'll solve the problem. Well, I think the opposite. I think the louder you are and the more, doors you knock on, the more opportunity there is for growth. And I saw a really big need with our legislation in California. Assembly Bill 3070 impacted my trial. And I was annoying and I bugged our local assemblyman.
Mm.
And last Tuesday, I got to stand on the Capitol steps and present a public safety package. And that is only because I would not stop. So it's for no particular reason that I actually am able to, make lemonade out of lemons. It's just the fact that I didn't want to give up. So I think, I talk to police officers every single day, dispatchers, ambulance drivers, nurses, you name it. And we all feel the same way. We're all struggling in our own minds. We're all struggling with our own things. So I just wanted to try and do something. I wasn't ready to give up my 30-year career. I only had 3 years on. I mean, I barely broke the tip of the iceberg. I wasn't done. So once I finally came to a place of healing that I felt ready to speak, I just felt like God had put it in my path.
Yeah, I truly think things happen for a reason. And listening to your story, it makes sense, right? Like there's no quitting you, even when there's a part of you that thought you wanted to quit, right? There's this overwhelming rest of you that was like, F no, we're gonna do this hard work. And you had your community and leaned into your tribe and you got there, right? Look at you now and you're carrying the flag. And I love how you focused in on legacy because I think that that's so impactful. Like we talk about the purpose and the passion that brings us into the job, but then the focus should always be on legacy and like where we're leaving things, whether it's 3 years or 30. And we talked a little bit about things before we started recording. What I really wanted to focus on the sense of identity and role and legacy because that is a struggle that luckily is an increased conversation with people leaving the badge behind, right? Whether they retire or they resign, people that have been working the 30 years and they do not want to let go because it's terrifying to leave all that, right? And so I'm curious if you had any other reflections that helped you with that process in the last couple of years.
I had a huge identity crisis. I mean, when you're a cop all the time. As much as we don't want to be, you go to a barbecue and somebody says, "Oh, hey, that's Megan. She'll sign your tent ticket." Like you are identified on and off the job. You sit with your back to the wall because you want to see the door. I mean, it's just built into us. So I found that service doesn't just have to be wearing, a uniform and patches. It can be getting involved with your local legislation. It can be getting involved with, the school board. It can be just being a coach for your son's softball or baseball team. Like it doesn't have to just be one mainstream thing. You can branch off and be, serviceable in other aspects. I didn't know where I was going to be. I honestly thought that I was at the end of my road and I had nothing left to offer until I started making stupid little, content on social media. And then I would have one person reach out and say, "Hey, thank you. Like, I'm a mom. I didn't know if I could be vulnerable because I'm a female." And it just, spiraled into this beautiful, organic place of just healing for everybody. And
Mm.
I think that can speak to so many different things. My husband and I talk about it all the time. He is so invested in his job. I tell him, I said, "Corey, you need to find something else because eventually
Mm.
it's going to be over, whether you want
Yeah.
it to be or not." That's just the nature of the beast. And of course, he's 12 years in and he's still fighting. But I think it's just important to remember that if your time comes to an end, whether it's because you want it to or not, there are 1,000 other avenues of service you can get into.
Yeah. I think that is a comforting piece for me, and I'll share that I smirk to myself and to you on video, but for work-life balance, someone that talks about work-life balance, and I've had a lot of struggles through the years at different assignments, different ranks with work-life balance in different ways for different reasons. But a lot of them are just because I just want to get things done and I want to do my best. Probably ingrained from childhood and things like that. But even as I develop things like this podcast, it takes a lot of time and it is pretty ancillary to the job. It does get me and keep me in job mode, but I feel very comforted knowing that it is a pursuit that is not literally my job, and it's allowed me to connect with so many individuals that are prior law enforcement, such as yourself, that are fighting the good fight, and so many people outside of law enforcement, right? Other first responders, vets, healthcare professionals that aren't even, quote unquote first responders, because it is just about getting better and trying to offer that knowledge, insight, and shared community. So, Megan, you shared a lot of what you have been working on. What is next for you and what's on the horizon?
I really don't know. I am just trying to plug myself in where I can. Right now, like so many, I'm really invested in our local politics. I think that is kind of a tune out point for a lot of people, but I think it's so important. Everybody is focused on the big picture of the presidential election, and that is, of course, important. But I also recognize that for so many of our issues at the state level, it comes from your local politicians. And my life was forever changed by a failed piece of legislation. So now I try and partner up with some of our local delegates and try and help, convey their message because social media is the new advertising. There's, people watch news to get content for social media. Like, let's just be honest. So
Hmm.
I really try and just be intentful and purposeful on putting my energy where it is needed. And some days it looks like just being a mom and taking care of my babies, and other days it's going to different conferences and speaking about my journey and lessons learned. And, I'm just hopeful that something good will come from all of this. And I have seen it already. I can feel it. It's tangible. I am just hoping that, we can keep moving this ball forward and just being transparent and open. That's all I want.
Yeah. I love that, and I do believe and I do perceive that it is moving. Sometimes it feels like it's at a halt. Sometimes it feels like two steps forward, one step back, but hey, it's still two steps forward. So we're gonna keep in that fight and keep doing what we got to do.
That's right. That's all we can do. You got to keep fighting because, if you get knocked down, you don't lose unless you stay down. So as long as you get back up, that's all that matters.
Yeah, and what better person than to give that allegory than someone that literally did that in so many different ways, from literal to then all the follow up figurative. And I love how you kind of ended it with discussion of like, hey, you're a mom doing the mom thing, and you shared earlier, when you were talking about being a single mom coming to the job, and I think I want to focus in on that because it is something that a lot of times, it's one of my favorite hiring candidates is just like a single parent or like a mom just like grinding it and like I don't know if I have what it takes to do this challenge. And as a newer parent, like I've been a parent a handful of years and I've been a cop a lot longer. And I will say to be a good parent or try your best to be a good parent is so much harder. So, for those that are doubting themselves and there is such a lack of confidence in that realm, with when you look at certain folks that are like, I just don't know if I can do it, man, throw yourself at it and let's find out.
I had really hard days on patrol, but nothing really compares to having little kids. I'll be honest. I am in the trenches right now. I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. And man, some days
Oh
I'm
my
like,
goodness.
give me a burglary. Like, please give me a fraud investigation. I will take it.
Yeah. Or yeah, let's talk about like maintaining a temper with a drunk a-hole that's trying to fight you and trying to spit. Like you feel those moments where you're like, oh man, like give me a reason. But you keep it together because you're a professional, right? And you're
Mhm.
trained and you're representing the badge and this higher ideal. So we keep it together. Sometimes we tap our partners out. I think we're getting better at that as an industry. But man, how quickly I can lose my temper with my little girl. Like she knows exactly how to push our buttons at times. And
Yeah.
I was like, man, I did not want to raise my voice, but she started,
Yeah.
And I'm a grown man. Yeah.
Yep. I wake up every day. I'm like, okay, gentle parenting. We got this. It's fine. By like 8 o'clock, I'm like, man, what happened?
Yeah. What
Just
was
gotta
that joke? Yeah.
gotta keep trying.
Yeah. It's not a real thing. It's just on Instagram. Well, hey, Megan, thank you so much. We've covered a lot of ground and so much benefit. And I love that you're out there sharing your message. Where can folks find you and help in the things you're working on?
Well, I really only have Instagram. I just branched into the LinkedIn X world, but I have like 3 followers. So I don't really
All
get how
right.
all that works yet. But yeah, if people want to follow me on Instagram, I hate to plug that in. It's like really embarrassing, but I do pride myself on if you message me, I get back to every single person. I set my alarm 4 hours before my kids wake up and I respond to every single message. So if I can't help you and you don't want to talk to me, I will find you someone you want to talk to. I will find you resources. If you want to be involved in, helping us to push these bills along, of course, we would appreciate that. And, like I've been saying all along, community is comfort. So if you need somebody that gets it, I do. I've been there. So thank you.
Yeah, that's so huge. And your links will be in the show notes. And my personal challenge to you over the next year will be stop apologizing for the quote unquote plugging yourself. You're doing a very noble thing. You're helping the space, you're helping the community. I dealt with the same thing. Maybe I still have my moments where I am, right? Like awkwardly, like, well, if you want to get a hold of me.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know why you're doing it. And we're talking about legacy. And so please keep doing what you're doing. I'm excited to see what's next. And yeah, everybody go follow Megan and check the show notes for that info. Just go ahead and please tell us your Instagram handle real quick. And then we specify the spelling, Megan, for those
Yeah.
that are unaware.
So it's Meagan McCarthy. It's Meagan. And then McCarthy, McCarthy, with 2 underscores at the end. Somebody had already taken my name, so it's
Oh,
just my name with 2 underscores.
all right. Well, you'll find her. So thanks again so much for your time.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.